So now we're going to start to describe the locations of some of the various muscles. First, we have to talk about origin and insertion. Every muscle has 2 points. It has a point where it originates and a point where it inserts or ends. And usually these are going to be on different bones because muscles, if they're attached to the same bone, they're not going to be able to decrease the size. So let's pretend that your biceps brachii originated up here in the shoulder at the top of the humerus here and inserted in the humerus. If we were to contract this muscle, it's not going to break your bone in order to bend the humerus. Instead, it originates up here at the top and it inserts down here in the radius. The insertion will always move toward the origin. So as this muscle contracts, the insertion is pulled toward the origin and it causes flexion at this joint. So most muscles want to cause movement of levers in the body. So they insert on one bone, or originate on one bone, insert in another, and then the insertion is pulled toward the origin. You do not need to know the origin and insertion of every muscle, but you do need to know what these terms mean. So the origin is where the muscle begins. The insertion is where the muscle ends. The insertion is moved toward the origin during a muscle contraction. Many of our muscles are grouped together, and they're going to work with or against each other in order to provide all of the movements that our body requires. The prime mover is the major muscle within a group. Agonists are muscles that are in the same group as a prime mover, and they're all going to perform a similar function. So if we think about the quadriceps, quad is for 4. There's actually 4 muscles in that muscle group that work together. The one in the middle, the rectus femoris, is the prime mover of that group. But all of the muscles in that group are agonists. They're within the same group, and they're going to perform a similar function. So the vastus lateralis, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius are going to work along with that rectus femoris in order to cause extension at the knee. Antagonists are muscles that are going to have opposite functions. So if we think about the biceps brachii and triceps brachii, those are the muscles in the upper arm. The biceps brachii are on the front surface of the arm, the anterior aspect, and when they contract, they cause flexion at the elbow. The triceps brachii are in the back side of the arm, or the posterior surface, and when the triceps brachii contract, they cause extension at the elbow. So together, the biceps brachii and triceps brachii are antagonists. Synergists are muscles from a different group that are going to perform a similar function. So the example they give here of a synergist is the deltoid and the biceps brachii. Both of those muscles are going to work together in order to cause a flexion contraction at the elbow. In addition to knowing the location of these muscles, you should be familiar with their functions. So I'm going to begin by going through some of the major muscles of the head and torso now. So the orbicularis oculi, it orbits the eye. It surrounds the eye. And this is responsible for closing the eye. If you ever see someone suddenly drop dead in a movie or possibly in real life, hopefully that never happens to you, but if they don't think to close their eye before their death, their eyes are going to be open. And you've probably seen this in movies and so forth, because it requires an active muscle contraction in order to close your eye. That is the orbicularis oculi. Orbicularis oris surrounds the mouth, and that's responsible for closing the lips. So once contracted, the lips are closed. The zygomaticus major This is found right here, right in the zygomatic region, or the cheek region, and it draws the angles of the mouth upward and outward. It's a major muscle used in smiling and laughing. The platysma is this very large muscle that kind of drapes over the cervical region and the upper torso. This is responsible for facial expression. You can see how very large this muscle is, and that's all just for facial expression, which tells you that in an evolutionary standpoint, facial expression is very important to us. The occipital frontalis. This muscle actually begins in the frontal region inserts in the frontal region and originates in the back of the head. So occipital frontalis, it originates in the occipital region and inserts in the frontal region. When the insertion is pulled toward the origin, this one raises the eyebrows and wrinkles the forehead. So this muscle that goes all the way up the top of the head, all the way to the back of the head, that's the occipital frontalis. Some textbooks will break this down into the occipital belly and the frontal belly of the occipital frontalis. But you just need to know the name of the entire muscle. The masseter. Masseter is in the side of the jaw, and that's responsible for closing the jaw. The scientific term for chewing is mastication, and we'll learn about that when we get to the digestive system. But the masseter aids in mastication, and I can spell that word out for you just so you can get a visual on it. Temporalis. So the temporalis is on the side of the skull here. It covers the temporal bone of the skull, and this is responsible for closing the jaw. So it originates up here in the temporal region, it inserts down here in the mandible, and when it contracts, the insertion is pulled toward the origin and it causes the closing of the jaw. The sternocleidomastoid. Sternocleidomastoid is this thin muscle that starts down here in the sternum, and so it originates in the sternum and inserts into the mastoid process of the temporal bone. When this one contracts, it causes head rotation. So you have one on the left side of the neck and one on the right side of the neck. So just a review of some of these muscles that we already went over. This is that occipital frontalis, so it goes all the way around the top of the head. Orbicularis oculi surrounds the eye. Orbicularis oris surrounds the mouth. The zygomaticus major goes over the zygomatic region. The masseter aids in chewing. This temporalis is also going to aid in chewing, but it closes the jaw. The sternocleidomastoid goes around the sides of the neck. Breathing. Breathing involves three muscles: the external intercostals, the internal intercostals, and the diaphragm. The external intercostals are responsible for breathing in. So external is responsible for inhalation. So anytime that you want to take a breath, your external intercostals have to contract to raise the rib cage. The internal intercostals are only needed for forceful expiration, or forcing air out of the lungs. When you breathe out, it's usually a passive process. Those external intercostals relax, the diaphragm relaxes, the rib cage goes down, the diaphragm goes up, so that decreases the size of the thoracic cavity, and air is just going to passively flow out of the lungs. But if you have some respiratory distress, And you need to force air out of the lungs. If you have asthma, emphysema, or COPD, if you are trying to just simply blow up a balloon and you have to force air out of the lungs, then you're going to stimulate those internal intercostals to contract. So external and internal intercostals are responsible for breathing, and they're going to line the inside of the ribs. They're oriented in a different direction, which is why they have different functions. And then the diaphragm. So this is a picture, it kind of looks like a parachute inside, and it separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity. The diaphragm is also responsible for breathing. If you need to hiccup, the diaphragm gets stimulated to contract. So this shows the external intercostals, the internal intercostals, and the diaphragm. So going on to the abdominal muscles. All of the abdominal muscles are going to do a similar function. They compress the abdomen, help keep the abdominal organs in place, and they help maintain posture. There are 3 layers of abdominal muscles. The outermost layer is known as the external oblique. Now this region here has been cut out just so you can see the underlying layers. But the external oblique is actually a continuous layer that goes over the entire surface of the abdomen. In the middle layer, there's actually 2 separate muscles. The internal oblique is on the sides, and the rectus abdominis goes straight up and down the center of the abdomen. The rectus abdominis gives us that six-pack appearance that, everybody has. Even if it's a little buried, we all have that rectus abdominis. And the innermost layer is the transversus abdominis. So that you can see pictured in here, and here you can see how it extends over the entire abdomen. The trapezius. The trapezius is this kite-shaped muscle that extends over the upper back, shoulders, and into the neck. On this left side, it's been cut away, but this exact same shape is on the left side as well. This is responsible for shrugging the shoulders. The pectoralis major covers the mammary regions, and this is responsible for flexing and adducting the arm. So we learned about the different body positions and body movements when we went through joints. So adduction of the arm, you're adding it back toward the body, so you're moving it back toward the midline. On an exam, when you have to start labeling these different parts, you can't just call these the pecs. So that's kind of the short abbreviated name. You have to actually spell out the full name of pectoralis major. The latissimus dorsi. The latissimus dorsi is a muscle that extends over the lower back. This is responsible for maintaining posture. So when you start to fall forward, your latissimus dorsi contracts in order to pull your body upright. When you start to fall backward, the abdominal muscles contract in order to keep your body upright. So the latissimus dorsi and abdominal muscles are, in a way, antagonists. They're going to work against each other in order to keep you upright.